Live.
We're live.
We're live.
Thanks for showing up. We actually started the podcast late, and Stephen, we just started it late, so I apologize. Thanks for showing up. Yay!
Thanks for waiting for us.
Yeah, it's great. It's great to have you. It's great to see you here. All right, we're ready. So I'm gonna start us. Do my podcast stretches real quick.
Yes, you got to get it ready.
Podcast yoga.
La, 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 la.
Warrior position.
Yes.
Sleeping dragon, crouching tiger.
3-point landing.
Drunken. All right. Good afternoon. Today is Friday, February 28th, 2020. Today we're going to talk about COVID-19 and WWDC, ARM chips for Mac, and a whole lot more, because this is the iMore Show. And joining us on the show today is expert therapist and the head of anxiety-videos.com, Georgia Dow. Welcome, Georgia.
Yipta!
Interesting. I'm worried that Georgia's going to be speaking a different language this entire time.
No, that's a Nintendo character, but which one? I forget which one.
You don't remember?
No, I do. Is that Chun-Li? Chun-Li?
Aha! Oh.
No, I have to say it. Ryuken!
and the Ryuken comes from Renee Ricci, who is Ryuken is our expert vector of vector fame from the YouTube channel. Welcome, Renee. How's it going?
So I wasn't sure if Georgia was talking about the Gaimela from Escaflowne or the Hitokiri Batusai, who was Rurouni Kenshin, and I had to make a quick guess that it was Chun-Li. So now I feel better.
Nice. You two are a little out of my league on this. I never actually played. That's Street Fighter, right?
That one's Street Fighter, yeah.
Yeah.
And the others are anime.
I just threw in a bunch of anime stuff for the nerds.
And, yeah.
Yeah, well, you got me beat. I'm at a loss. I like to brag about my Nintendo roots, but I never really got
Street Fighter, Laurie?
I didn't. I've played it a couple times. I've never been a fighting game fan, so I'd play it a couple times and be like, "You just mash the buttons down. What's the point?" And then I wouldn't play it.
That's my strategy. I only button mash, which means I win all the early fights, and then people learn what they're doing and just destroy me. So I go into the next game and repeat.
Yeah, that's probably what I would have done if I'd have decided to try to keep playing, but I got over it real fast. So sorry.
I tried to make Georgia rewatch the Street Fighter movie with me, with Raul Julia and Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Oh, yeah.
And she refused, so I watched it. It was so bad. So bad. Not as bad as the Super Mario movie, but so bad.
Yeah. It's really funny when they try to turn video games into movies. They almost never work out.
No.
I like that they've done animation now, though. I think that's better than trying to turn animation into real world. But if it's just animation, like, the animation from the game turning into animated movies, I feel like that's an easier.
Like Detective Pikachu?
Yeah, or the Sonic the Hedgehog,
cute,
which I still haven't seen.
Do not make fun of my
Sonic,
Mario.
I'm a Canadian. I liked the Detective Pikachu movie, actually. I thought that was very cute. The problem is usually it's just a cash grab. They're gonna, so many people love whatever, movie, Halo, so they just make it and everyone's gonna go see it because they love the video game, but it's not really good. But again, like video game to show sometimes does work. Witcher, I enjoy.
Well, Netflix has the huge animated Pokemon movie coming out. I think it's this week or next week or something. They remade the Mewtwo movie.
Yeah, which I went and saw in theaters, so I'm excited to see a live action remake of that and see what they do with it. That'll be interesting.
So scared now. They're trying to Mario shame me in the chat. I'm sorry.
Renee,
I'm Canadian. I say a boot. I say processor. I say food. Okay, last digression, but I was watching this video from Half as Interesting where they took a bunch of people and checked their accents and then had them overwinter in Antarctica to see if their accent would change the way that like early settlers did when they were isolated. And it turns out they all got a Toronto accent. I'm like, if you're going to send people to just shiver away in the winter, you've already done it with Toronto. Why do you have to repeat it?
We do winter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You do know how to do winter. That's for sure. Yeah. So let's get started. First, let's talk about let's call it the elephant on the room, or the thing that is on everybody's mind right now, which is COVID-19 and its imminent spread and how that's affecting the tech industry at large and how it might affect the tech industry for Apple come in the next coming months. So what we've seen so far is there was a couple of conferences that were either canceled or a lot of big organizations, big companies that have dropped out. And the most recent one that I think is very striking for in terms of how that might relate to what's going to happen with Apple is Facebook canceled their F8 conference, which it's sort of their version of WWDC. And that's why I think
same location.
Yeah. And I think that's why it seems to kind of hit home harder for Apple fans, because this is, you know, there's the comparison is so stark that you can really tell that this is big. So Renee, do you think, you know, we've still got until June before the WWDC? It's quite a few months out at this point, but we're also seeing information coming from the World Health Organization and CDC that a spread is coming. We just have to, kind of prepare for how big it gets. It may not get that bad. We may be able to contain it and it won't spread that bad. So what do you think? Do you think Apple's going to take that risk, or do you think they might back out? Obviously they'll probably wait a few months before making an official decision.
Yeah, I mean, there's I guess a couple things. One is the virus itself, and the other is the virus that is human reaction. And they both are unpredictable, because the virus is gonna do what it's gonna do, but the way we react to it is gonna be potentially less damaging or more damaging, including the amount of fear and the amount of incompetence or competence that we put into it. So right now, it's hard to tell how much is actionable, real information from people who are scientists. You know, we live in a period of time that I never thought we'd see, where we've decided to devalue education and science and all of the things that are so vital that have brought us so far. It's sort of like, you know, those angry kids who don't respect anything that their parents have accomplished, but we're doing it as a society. And it's left us really vulnerable to conspiracy theories and negligence and all of these things. So we're gonna have to pay particular attention, especially Apple, because they are so invested in China, not just from the supply chain, but also it's a huge developer community for them. WWDC is an international show, and people are going to have to travel. And it's very hard to quarantine people, tell people, oh, if you want to come to WWDC, you've got to come 2 weeks early and spend 2 weeks in quarantine. It's incredibly expensive. So there's all of that. Then there's the fear of liability. These companies aren't just canceling because they're worried about the virus. They're canceling because they think if they send somebody and that person contracts the virus, they'll be sued. They'll have huge legal liability and exposure. And if Apple has people go to WWDC and someone gets sick, does Apple have a bunch of exposure? And can we trust any of these organizations when they give us the rates of the communication, if they're actually treating people in a responsible way? There's so many unknowns. My guess is that because Apple usually waits so long to announce it, it's actually a benefit here, because they don't have to make a decision. Like they personally do, they have to rent the facility and all that, but that's going to cost them. If they have to cancel after they've paid for the San Jose Civic Center, that's going to cost them. It's not going to cost us. Probably some developers have already rented their rooms, thinking I do that. I rent like a year, I reserve a year in advance to try to make sure I get a good deal. And maybe some of us don't have, like mine, you can cancel, maybe not everybody's. So there's a minor outlay there, but I think Apple's going to wait until the last possible moment and develop a contingency plan for, if WWDC goes ahead, how can we minimize risk and maximize rewards for everybody involved? And then if it doesn't go ahead, what do we have to do in order to announce the same products and give the same information and get developers the same experience that we would have gotten them if they had come? And at least, like you said, we have Facebook, because that's a massive developer conference too. We can look at them and see what they do as maybe a hint at what's possible.
Yeah. Yeah. Georgia, do you think that how do you think about the balance of sort of the fear of the spread versus the reality of the spread, and how everyone is handling it? Do you think we're doing it right or doing it wrong? Like what's your opinion on just kind of like the general sentiment of it?
Yeah, well, I think that we often do it wrong, unfortunately. I think that it's really hard. World travel, it's hard for people to tell, no matter what the CDC says, or it's really hard for us to listen to large groups to be able to actually say, don't do this and do this, because so many businesses are reliant upon world travel. And so I think that it is a really important thing that we have better systems in place to make sure that if you're travel advisory for your territory area goes to a level 4, which is like a do not travel, versus a 1, just, be careful, wash your hands, and, don't scratch your face, that we actually listen to that. So I think that fear spreads exceptionally quickly, but action spreads really slowly. And that puts us in a very dangerous place where certain parts of the world may not want to listen to, because their economy is based upon being able to travel and do things. So they want to gain as much money as possible. And then that makes the fear spread really quickly when we hear about one place that is really far away from us. Like, it's, again, this, you should be cautious and not maybe travel to a place where the CDC says don't travel to. But I think that for Apple, it becomes one of these things that it's not as dangerous for like spread of disease because of where it's at, but more, it will look like negligence, I think, on Apple's part if the virus is not kind of contained and we don't kind of have a hold on it. And they hold this. If one person gets sick and it's tracked down that the spread happened at WWDC, this is going to really be destructive to Apple. And so they have to look at the costs versus the benefits of carrying out. And right now, we don't know. They have enough time to think about it. Yeah. But they're probably making decisions already about, like, I would lean that they're probably leaning towards, let's not do this unless something big changes soon.
Yeah.
Because, that would be just a night. Like, what would happen if they actually had a spread that was linked to WWDC? That would be,
It would be really difficult for them to spin that story in a better light. There's a couple things too. Renee had spoken to, if Apple books the venue and then ends up having to cancel, that's just out of pocket for them. It doesn't cost that much. But if they go through with it and something bad does happen, then that's like a much larger, negative, not just from Apple, but, from anybody who gets sick from it. I keep thinking of Disneyland and how, right now everything is fine. There hasn't been a spread in Southern California at all. There hasn't been any cases found specifically in Southern California yet. So the Disney day to day is probably keeping track of this kind of thing, because to me, that's such an international place on the daily. And, any tech conference, and Apple's tech conference, it's very similar. It's a global gathering. And for Disneyland, at any point, they could become the place where, something started and spread from it. And when do you decide to shut it down, to not, do you wait until there's a spread to shut it down, or do you stop it beforehand? And cost is a factor. We had a group of people with our Future Labs team with our Future team going to the Mobile World Conference. Hotels were booked, flights were booked, the conference was still going, and then suddenly the conference was canceled maybe 2 weeks before it was supposed to take place. So not just the company lost out on the conference runners at Mobile World Conference, but so did everybody else who booked flights and hotels. We all lost out on a little bit of money. Some things you couldn't get any money back for. Some things you could get some money back, but not all. Some of them were, you could put it towards something else in the future. So there also is that point where Apple has to decide on not just the loss of their own income, but the loss of income for everybody else who might not be able to, at the last minute, the plans change. It's not about, like, Apple can reimburse the cost of the ticket to everybody, but they can't go in to every single hotel and make those hotels give the developers back their money that they lost out on for not going to, not being able to go to the conference. So as late as they can wait, I also think there's so much more to consider with that, because if they wait and then make the final decision, we'll just go through with it, but then change their minds after they've made the announcement, then they're still in a position where it's harder on developers to deal with the loss of income that comes from not being able to get reimbursed for the things that they had to pay for in preparation for an event that doesn't take place. So this also keeps making me think, and I know we've talked about this before, because of the potential March event that Apple has every year, or not every year, but often has around this time of year. there's less people that travel from around the world to go to this event, this press event, but it's still a lot of travel and some international travel, and just generally just people congregating from a lot of different places. Renee, because this is so much closer than WWDC, what do you think they might do? Let's say Apple decides that they're just not going to do a March event. They're just not going to risk that. They're not going to put anybody's travel in jeopardy or put any kind of, risk out for that. What's an alternative that would still meet the standards that happen at a March event? So the first thing that I was thinking is that they would just do a press conference without anybody in the room, but that doesn't help with the hands-on area. So Renee, what do you think would be a good sort of in between that can work to announce products, but also not make everybody fly to Cupertino for it?
Yeah, I've been thinking, and it's really, really hard to figure out because Apple could even just have the Steve Jobs Theater filled with Apple employees and broadcast that and have everyone could watch their keynote online. But like you said, there's no hands-on there. And if they do briefings, sometimes they haven't done an event, but they've done a tour where they go to New York and San Francisco and Beijing and all these places, and you do 1-on-1 or 2-on-1, 3-on-1, 6-on-1, 12-on-1 briefings. But that still involves travel and that still involves people, and it's not as big a group, but it's still a group. And if they just mail products to people, then you have the risk of things like the smart battery case, where a bunch of people are like, oh, it's more expensive and smaller. And you're trying to explain battery efficiency to them, and because no one has sat them through. And I'm not saying this to be rude, but a lot of technology public people aren't that technological. They don't, they have 800 reviews to do and all they do is churn it out. They don't have time to sit and stop and think about it. So unless they're handheld to a certain extent, they don't know what's going on with the product. So you risk a whole bunch of not very well thought out coverage. And I don't, these products don't seem so critical, at least. It's not like it's the iPhone 9. It's not the new iPhone. And we know what an iPhone 8 is. We know what we know what an iPhone 11 is. The tags are a newer thing. So it really depends. If it is a bunch of updates, I think that makes it a lot easier for everybody because they can just FedEx them to reviewers and do phone briefings. But if it really is new and different, and I just worry that, we talked about this before, they'll announce the tiles, and even though there's been all those tiles beforehand and they'll be like, oh, Apple's making it so you can stalk people. And it's oh.
What if they did the presentation like they usually do? They have that streamed. In Cupertino, that's streamed. You can take a look, you can watch it, and then everyone can go to their own native Apple store where they have one in every 3 districts, so that it's kind of close. You go there, that can be hands-on. So you end up with the hands-on piece. They could even live stream it there from, the end of an Apple store. And then you kind of have a little bit of both. Would that be horrible? Because then they could answer the questions, maybe not as well as it would be if you were actually there, and you could pick up your products at the same time.
Well, you still have to go. It would stop them from having to travel, but you still have to go to a place like an Apple store.
But it's traveling to an Apple store, you're in your own area. Really, what we're wanting to stop is international travel from areas where the level of safety guidance is levels 2 and 3 and 4, right? There are no 4s right now, by the way. There's only 6 places that are on the travel guidance from the CDC. China, South Korea, Japan, Italy, Iran, and Hong Kong, and only 2 are level 3s. None are do not travel level 4. 3 are don't avoid non-essential travel, which is China and South Korea. The others are level 2 and level 1, which is just practice caution or practice enhanced caution. So again, this is not, I think that we are more worried than what it is at. I'm not saying, still you should wash your hands, but you should be washing your hands and not touching your hands to your face anyways. And if you haven't been doing that, this is just a smart thing to do. Your hands touch everything, and then touch open areas you shouldn't do that anyways. But so it would at least stop that.
Yeah.
People are still going to shopping malls and other things, and you shouldn't be stopping that at this point.
I think these it all makes the most sense that Apple would have a live stream that only Apple employees are at, so that we get that part of it. We're at home watching it instead of there, but we get to see it. And then as a replacement for a hands-on, Renee, your kind of description of sitting in on a call with an Apple PR person who explains those things to you. But the sort of action of being able to do that seems pretty intense. I would have to imagine that if it were something like Apple Tags, Apple doesn't want to do this over the phone, with people where they don't have the product in hand. They want to make sure that they can control the narrative before it gets out. Obviously, journalists and writers, they're going to write whatever they're going to write. But if Apple can explain it to them before they take it into their hands, then they'll have like this background information that they can use to base what their review is going to be on. But it still seems really daunting and almost untenable, considering how many people show up at the Apple events versus how many people get phones in hands or tags in hands or something like that. But
well, yeah, you have like 5 phones for 5,000 people at an Apple event, and you'd have to send so many phones out just for the hands-on. Like you probably would not get a hands-on. You'd probably just get a review unit.
Yeah, there would only be a certain number of people who would get the review unit and get that sort of prepped meeting ahead of time before they get it. But do you think, and Georgia, Renee, both you can tell me what you think of this. Do you think that's a better idea than going forward with a March event right now?
It's a hard thing to say. For me, it's a hard thing to say right now because there's still a certain amount of time. And if we, kind of work on the numbers are starting to, instead of increase, kind of go down then it might not be that much of an issue. If we end up finding something that works very effectively in treating it, then it wouldn't be as large of an issue. But I think that if it continues the way that it is, it probably, just so that Apple does not look negligent and their stock takes a dive, might be better to just wait on it or postpone it till later. We could wait until the middle of, the end of summer, and then you could still have an event. It wouldn't be, the same, but I don't know. We're relatively patient. Well, no, we're not at all patient with our tech, but
yeah. Renee, what do you think? Do you think it would be smart for Apple to hold a March event, do it the way we've just been talking, where it's live streamed and not actually in person? Or maybe what Georgia just recommended is let's just hold off, just wait, and maybe do the same thing at WWDC if that happens. Do it in the summer.
Or the worst of both worlds. Where like last year, Lori and I went to the event and it was all about Apple TV. And then I had to fly back and forth to New York and California like 4 other times in the same month for AirPods and for the new MacBook Pros and for like everything. So, I mean, all those are options. Samsung just had their event. I mean, that didn't stop them, but Mobile World Congress was canceled. The Geneva Auto Show was just canceled. People are worried the Olympics might be canceled, and it's not going to be rescheduled. It's just see you in 4 years, suckers. Bye.
I feel bad for all the people that train for it because that might be there. But again, safety and health first, and you really are traveling from all over the world. That would maybe not be the best.
I saw a CNN poll, and I'm always dubious about these kind of polls, but it said that 33% of Americans had stopped drinking Corona beer out of fear for coronavirus. And I'm just like, it's like they talk about a great filter, like this whole theory about what stops a civilization before they get to interstellar travel. And I just keep thinking it's us. We just get stupid. Like we have all this evolution, and then at a certain point, we get so stupid, we end ourselves. But not even with like a big explosion. It's just we get dumber and we lie down and we just fall asleep, and that's it for us.
We just stop trying. We just give up. I think that we have to remember it's not 33% of people. It's 33% of people that would do an online poll. And then
and there's lots of people who troll. So
yeah, exactly. Just because that would be hilarious, and it goes on to a Reddit thread, and then everyone's gonna destroy the poll, and you end up with this.
And honestly, if I were CNN and I did that poll and that were the results, I would think, this is hilarious. We have to write this article, even though it's clearly bullshit. It's just too funny to pass that one up. So yeah, Renee, you had mentioned that Samsung held a very successful event, and that's a really good thing to remember. Is that this was right after the Mobile World Congress was canceled, or was it right before it was canceled? It was very, very close to the same time. Yeah, it
was before. Yeah,
which is kind of where the fervor was kind of growing at its peak is around that time. And it was very successful, and there hadn't been any sort of issue relating to a spread of a virus or anything like that. And so In terms of the March event, I think that's one thing to remember is that Samsung was able to very successfully have that. And it's more likely, Georgia, just like you're saying, it's more likely that something like that would happen with Apple, that nothing would happen, that everything would be fine. For an event like that, where it's not quite so global, it's more, most people are coming from the United States. A few people might be coming from Canada, and maybe in Europe somewhere, but it'd be less likely that there would be as many people coming globally to the March event. So yeah, that actually makes me think right now, when Apple's kind of sitting at their table discussing what to do, whether or not they should hold it or not, that's probably, well, Samsung did it, so we can do it, is probably one of the conversations being had right now. So yeah.
Samsung, I think, kind of snuck in under the wire. I think if it had been just a little bit later, they would have had way more problems having that event.
Or at least
that's a
there'd be a bigger
event. Yeah.
There'd be a bigger discussion as to whether or not that should take place. Definitely. So yeah. So let's move on. But before we do,
before we move on, can we just double down? So the March event, I think, is in a lot of danger. WWDC, I think we have to wait a month, maybe 2 months before we know for sure.
Yeah, I think you're totally right that it's just too early to speculate on something like WWDC coming in June, and that, the same thing with the Olympics is like that it's far enough away right now. We can't make speculations. Like, we have to kind of see how things turn out. We only just, was it 3 days ago that the CDC had kind of posited the information that it's definitely going to spread in the US. It's just how bad it will spread. And before that, we weren't sure that it was going to spread at all in the US. So, and that might change. The CDC might change their mind and say, looks like we contained it. Looks like it's not going to spread. Everybody's fine. Go about your business. So, yeah.
If they merge them both, if they merge the March event with WWDC, they just have to flip over one of the
Yeah, and I said it in the chat, and I'll say it here, is like we're so dumb as a species. We have people who don't believe in vaccines but believe that 5G can kill them. And if only we could make them think that 5G was fixed by vaccines, we'd have a fighting chance. But I'm not sure.
They thought they would have faster internet with that, then everyone would be going for it. The world would be better.
Yeah, it's like we want to believe everything that's weird. We don't want to believe anything that's been worked on.
Yeah,
money culture. The Vampire Diaries, those are absolutely true. The Vampire Diaries.
Oh, wait, what?
Wait, what? Vampires? Real? Before we move on, actually, though, let me tell you a little bit about Netgear, who is a sponsor of this week's episode of the iMore Show. Is your Wi-Fi feeling old? Does it buffer while streaming? Does connecting to new devices slow it down? Can it handle gaming, video games, large file transfers? What happens when you try to do it all at once? It doesn't matter how fast your internet connection is if your Wi-Fi router is old and outdated. With Orbi Wi-Fi 6 from Netgear, your Wi-Fi will feel new again. Wi-Fi 6 is the latest tech that allows more devices to connect and stream simultaneously without impacting speed or reliability. The result delivers the fastest Wi-Fi for all your devices anywhere in your home. Stream HD, 4K, or even 8K without buffering, eliminate lag while gaming, and connect to more devices to your Wi-Fi than ever before. Orbi Wi-Fi 6 is like upgrading your Wi-Fi to first class. If you're ready for the best Wi-Fi ever, you can get it today from Netgear and never worry about Wi-Fi again. Check out Orbi Wi-Fi 6 at your local Best Buy or at netgear.com/best Wi-Fi. That's netgear.com/best Wi-Fi. Thank you, Netgear, for sponsoring this week's episode of the iMore Show. So while we're talking about things coming in the near future, or maybe not quite so near future, an ARM chip is going to be in the next MacBook 2020, or was it MacBook Pro is going to be their first one? Renee, tell me a little bit about that.
Yet. Yeah, this is all.
No, not now, not at all now.
No, but like this was just a Ming-Chi Kuo throwaway. He's like, oh, by the way, they're putting custom silicon into the Mac, which has been a rumor for years. And like, I know Lori likes to sit. She's elf when it comes to Ming-Chi Kuo. She's like, you sit on a throne of lies and stink of meat and cheese. And yes, it could totally be true. But I think just as people who love Apple, and we've just been waiting for something new and fresh. It's like a flip phone. It's like, give us a new architecture, throw away that Intel and put an ARM chip in. But I just put a video live on this, and there's so many questions. It's like the ARM chips we have now would be great in a 12-inch MacBook or MacBook Air. Could they make one that's great in a MacBook Pro or an iMac? Maybe. We don't have it now, but doesn't mean they couldn't have designed it. Or maybe they flip the table and you have an ARM processor and an Intel coprocessor for legacy software. But then what about the iMac Pro and Mac Pro? Do you have like a blade of ARM servers that you slide in like an accelerator card? I just have so many questions, but I do think there's like two advantages that this would have that they never had with the Intel transition back when they made Marklar, which was the South Park derived code name for the Intel Mac. One is they had to give.
You are not Feklar, so but I'm going the wrong
different
way.
sci-fi. Yeah.
Sorry.
They had to give people these Frankenstein development machines back then, where today they could theoretically give you a special SDK that you could load onto your iMac Pro. Sorry, your iPad Pro, maybe even your Apple TV, and developers could start porting their apps that way. And also, Apple has like this silicon that they've made for the iPad Pro that would serve these lower level ones. And they've got Catalyst, they've got Swift UI, they've got all of these technologies, and our whole world has evolved now. Like if Microsoft doesn't port Office in a year, it's not a calamity. It's like I'm logging into Office.com or logging into G Suite. Or there's already Office for iPad, and there's already iWork for iPad. So those might be easy ports. So I think we have a lot of things going for us that we didn't necessarily have in the past.
So does this mean that like Apple might be ditching Intel?
Eventually. I mean, I think Intel has gotten to the point where every single reason Apple went with them over PowerPC, which was performance efficiency and a robust roadmap, has fallen away. Intel's taking forever to ship anything, and it's not as good anymore. And yes, it's convenient to stay with them, but Apple tends to look into the future and think, well, in 5 years, where will we be if we stick with them? Not necessarily like, what have you done for me lately, but what are you doing for me for the next 5 years?
So is there something that the ARM would benefit them with efficiency and battery life? Is there anything else that would be a benefit?
It's just control. It's mostly control. Like,
okay,
you can argue about whether it'll be an actual architectural advantage, but Apple, like that Intel is like 5 years behind on their roadmap, and they haven't made it to 10 nanometer. Not really. They're trying, but not really. And their performance efficiency isn't as good as it used to be. And Apple has been shipping new A series chips every damn year with the iPhone. Like, they have not missed one. And they can tie everything together. That's a machine that they've got going there. And so it gives what Apple loves best, which is control of their own destiny.
So when Apple settled with Intel, or was it the story is so convoluted at this point, I don't even remember. Apple settled with Intel over the use of the chips many years ago, this just happened last year. They created a new contract with them that they're going to continue to work with them for 5 more years. Did I have that right?
That's Qualcomm.
Did I get that right? It was Qualcomm.
Yeah.
Man, see, I messed that one all up. So never mind.
Well, it was the Intel modems. That was the whole Intel modem thing, is that Apple didn't want to pay Qualcomm was basically charging everybody for their most expensive modems. And Apple's like, we don't use them in most of our phones. We don't want to pay you. Go screw yourself. We're going with Intel. And Intel modems were never as good, but Apple still didn't want to overpay for them. So that lawsuit ended with Qualcomm. They signed back on it. So hopefully this year we'll get Qualcomm modems back in, but I don't think Qualcomm makes the same kind of silicon that Apple does. And they're using it in some Windows machines now, like especially the Windows 10, 10, XX10, whatever those things are called, machines. And Apple's equivalent would be just to use their own A series chips.
Yes, so that's kind of their goal, is to kind of get away from other chip makers and stand independently from that and be more in control of how often these chip updates happen, right?
Yeah.
So do you think in terms of why Intel is five years behind on their roadmap, do you think that it's because they're trying to accommodate so many different computers out there, so many different manufacturers out there, and Apple's advantage would be that it would only be doing this for its own, however many computers and the way it does with iPhone and iPad?
I think that's part of it. I mean, that was the advantage that Apple had over Qualcomm. Like Qualcomm back in the day had to support Android and Windows, and that meant supporting OpenGL and supporting DirectX. And it was just extra baggage. And also, when you're a silicon merchant, you have to make your money off the silicon. Your profit and loss is based on that chip. So it was in Qualcomm's best interest to leave old chipsets on the market longer because they made more money off them that way. Like they didn't want to go to 64-bit. And Apple did. So Apple went there and Qualcomm's like, we want to keep selling the 32-bit. What are you idiots doing? It's just your money for us. And it's just, and now Qualcomm is forced to compete like gangbusters. Like they cannot take a second to breathe because Apple is just absolutely relentless. And Apple doesn't do profit and loss on the chip. So like, they're just like, you guys go as fast as you possibly can. We'll make the money up on the whole device. So like, they don't have to worry about selling their chips to anybody else. And the same thing with Intel is, yes, they do have to support things for Windows and for Mac. And they make most of their money on servers, not on consumer machines. But also it's just like, they made bad decisions before, and they were rescued by their Israeli branch, which came up with the Core Duo idea when they were going in, I think it was the Itanium direction. And that AMD was crushing them, and they made this Core Duo thing, and they retook the lead. And now AMD is just crushing them again with Threadripper and Epic and all these things. And Intel still has some advantages, but that's mostly at the higher end stuff. And I think if Apple could do their own, they would just, this is a feature we want, the same as iOS. This is a feature we want in Mac OS. This is a silicon we're making for Mac OS. We will code exactly for the chip. The chip will be built exactly for the code, and you'll get more than the sum of the parts. And that's just a very compelling business solution for them.
Is there a negative to that kind of walled garden, let's call it, for Apple's sake? Will that negatively impact anything that developers are doing or consumers would be able to access or do?
I think it's the opposite at this point, because one of the reasons that Apple and NVIDIA don't get along is that NVIDIA wants Apple to use their stuff to write for CUDA cores and to go through NVIDIA, and Apple just wants access to the hardware, and they have their own layer, Metal. And I think what'll also help this transition is that Metal is like, these are your resources. And once you send us the task, we'll figure out, is it better to go to the CPU? Should it go to the T2 chip because that's still faster than anybody at doing H.265, for example, or should it go to the GPU? And the advantage of that is once you have that dispatcher, and Apple doesn't just make chips, they make controllers. And I think that's one of the unsung heroes, is that Apple didn't just make the chip, they made the chip controller, didn't make the AI block, they made the AI block controller, didn't just make storage, they made storage controllers. And so that's sitting there going left, right, and it's doing that so fast that if you pull out Intel, it may not even notice. It'll just go like, the tasks previously assigned to Intel are now going to Apple custom chip, or are now going to AMD's new GPU feature. And it makes them incredibly flexible. And the companies don't like that because it commoditizes them. And AMD isn't in a position to really refuse that because they need the business. So Apple's sort of like, you give us a bunch of transistors and we'll just take care of them. AMD's like, whatever you want, baby. Whatever you want.
We'll
and Intel's
do it.
like, no.
We'll do it. Yeah, exactly.
But we're not expecting to see anything like this before 2021, right? So we've still got a year, or maybe a little bit more than a year before we see this, if it is coming that soon, according to somebody who, in my opinion, is not as solid as he used to be about his leaks.
You're gonna get Piper angry.
I'm gonna make some people angry. I know. I should definitely stop saying that, because I'm sure that somebody's gonna come around and be like, "Listen, you don't know what you're talking about." And I'll be in trouble. So, but I'm just saying how I feel. But yeah, so maybe 2021 is where we're at. Maybe a little bit later, if Apple decides later is better, is smarter. Another thing that came up in this past week has to do with the iPad and a possible trackpad for iPad. So let me just start by saying that I have the Bridge keyboard with trackpad on using with my iPad Pro. It uses the accessibility assistive touch, that we all have right now. That is kind of like iPad OS's version of using a mouse or a trackpad. And I think it's fantastic. I absolutely love it. I use it all the time. There's a lot of flaws with it, but it's actually not a flaw in the trackpad from the Bridge keyboard. It's just a flaw in generally combining that sort of mouse and trackpad feature on iPad OS as an accessibility feature. And that's something that I think that'll change over time as Apple kind of goes all in on using this kind of mouse idea. So Renee, give me a little bit more information on what this rumor was, because I have to imagine it's more than just a trackpad, that software has to change too.
I mean, yeah, so there's a whole bunch of unknowns right now. And the rumor was just from the information saying that Apple was looking to incorporate trackpad into the next generation of smart keyboard. And right now, they don't, iOS has no concept of a mouse pointer. And we can argue about that. Steve Jobs famously would not allow arrow keys on the original Mac because he didn't want developers to take the easy way out and just port their old Mac 2 command line utilities, to the Mac, and then have people use the keyboard and never be forced to use the mouse. And now we can't think of a computer without like a mouse and a pointer. But iOS had no concept of it because it had direct manipulation. Like you didn't need to hold some external device. You just touch the screen and move it. But because of that, there was no pointer ever put in. Eventually we got cursor movement where you could, put two fingers down and move the cursor around, or use the magnifying glass and move the cursor around. But that only existed in text fields. And then we got the Apple TV, and that had the Focus UI where you could use George's favorite remote to go left and right and up and down and highlight different parts of the UI. But that only exists on the Apple TV. And so what they did with the last generation with iOS 13 is, as an accessibility feature, because some people just don't have the dexterity to do direct manipulation, they used assistive touch, which is a feature that will let like external devices make touch points on the screen to enable mouse and trackpad. But it doesn't work the same way a pointer does, and it's not combined with the text cursor. So it creates a very disjointed experience. It was literally meant as an accessibility feature, not as a mainstream feature. Right. But I have to think that if Apple's putting it on the trackpad, it has to graduate. And this is like a hugely divisive thing inside Apple and out, because some people still believe that a mouse and a pointer are not good for humans. Like they were better than the old terminals and punch cards and things, but it still requires a lot of high-end coordination and for people to think in a very computer way. And if someone is not comfortable or they feel stupid with the computer, just tapping the screen was so like freeing for them. It made like people bought iPads who couldn't even use a Mac. And they don't want to lose that. My thinking is that when you hold an iPad, it should be nothing like a Mac. Like it should be like an iPad experience. It should be like accessible to everybody. But if you make a keyboard and you can stick the iPad in it, then it should work as you expect a device with a keyboard to work. And that means not having to take your hands off the keyboard just to move the interface around. And that means you need a pointer. So leave it like an iPad by all means. Don't take that away from anybody. But if I dock it, if you make a keyboard and let me dock it, let it work like a device that's docked into a keyboard. End rant.
Yeah, I know that Apple is not one for choice. So, me saying like it just makes sense to be able to have the choice. There are definitely times I can fully understand there's accessibility that would be easier to use with a trackpad for some people. I would love that you have the choice to be able to hook in a mouse to it, be able to use a trackpad, or direct manipulation to the screen. But I can see that would be very difficult for some people to be able to directly manipulate it. And I definitely enjoy having the trackpad. And when I move to the iPad, I'm sad that I do not have that ability to choose the manner in which I manipulate with my computer. And for gaming and other things, the mouse may be easier for you and you may enjoy that. Like, why can't we just hook it in? Again, I know I am on the, outs with most, and that, Apple gives you, whatever, it's like Ford, you can have it in any color as long as that color is black. But,
or white.
Well, yeah, for Apple, it would be white. Yeah, my favorite color to have in any of my stuff. But I would love to have it. I think that it is a great idea. I think that I would use that and be very comfortable and happy with it, as long as it works well and smoothly. And that is the part that we'll have to, I guess, see where it goes.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think on the one hand, I can see why Apple might be resistant to adding mouse or pointer support, because of the hard work that they put in to develop a touch screen. They were the first to create the kind of touch interface that we have today that allows for gestures, multi-touch, and all of that. So much work has gone into making these mobile devices touch friendly and touch intuitive. It's very intuitive, just like Renee's saying that, like, things like spreading or pinching is such a natural thing to think to do when you're using your iPad, it makes you want to use an on a computer, even though they supposedly will never make touchscreen computers. But it's so much focus on the touch part of it and the elegance of the touch part of it. I can see why they might have been resistant to it. And then finally, step one, giving us pointer access in the way of assisted touch devices. It's very clunky though, but it does seem like a step one. So because I use the iPad with the trackpad on the Bridge keyboard all the time, what I see happening, and hopefully this would be something that Apple would definitely change if they were going to make a trackpad. There's always a dot on the screen. It doesn't disappear. Like when you're using your computer, it just it's not there until you kind of shake it and bring it back into existence. You don't see it as often. There's always this dot wherever the last time I used touch, assistive touch pointer with is there. And if the keyboard goes to sleep, the assistive touch icon appears, which is it's a faded out kind of dot that kind of hides out in the corner, but it's there for all assistive touch things and a lot of accessibility needs things. So what I would like to see, the biggest change I would like to see if Apple does something like this, is to make that pointer fade into obscurity or not be so noticeable on screen when I'm not using the touch. And sometimes if the keyboard is connected, if it's on, I will touch with my fingers and the trackpad pointer will move to that. And I'm not even using that. I touched it with my hand. Why is that doing that? So there's these little things that I hope will change. So I like the idea of this. And I think that this was going to be the next step for Apple. Why would they have put in this assistive touch pointer thing in the first place? Obviously, accessibility is a priority for them and they wanted to be able to do that. But I think this was a test run. They wanted to see how many people are going to use it. What is their reaction going to be to it? Are they going to like it? Are they going to hate it? And if it turns out to be a good thing that people do want this, then I could see them kind of creating the team saying, okay, team, let's turn this into a real pointer device that everybody uses, not just something that is, kind of a little clunky and not really working as well as we're familiar with and comfortable with, and move from there. So maybe not this year, but maybe in 2021, maybe at, next year's WWDC, we'll kind of see something big come out of that. So my next step is so that we just talked about a bunch of software, but what would it look like? So Apple's keyboard right now is, if I recall, I don't own one, so I apologize for not knowing for sure, but isn't it covered in cloth or vinyl or something like that?
The keyboard?
Yeah, Apple's smart
it's
keyboard.
taffeta. It's the best use of taffeta the side of a prom dress. They just made it completely out of, they made it completely out of fabric so that it's water resistant, and some people hate typing on it. I'm very typing agnostic, so it works great for me.
So imagine, Renee, since you use it all the time, what would it look like with a trackpad on it? How would that work?
So I've had this beautiful dream since BlackBerry did it with the BB10 devices, and that is you can swipe your finger across the keys and that would work like a trackpad.
Oh,
so there wouldn't have to be a separate trackpad.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Now, how would you click though? Would you press that key?
Ooh, see, I didn't think of clicking to. Maybe you double tap to click.
No, you see that? No, people won't like that then.
Yeah, because
if you have
press
to
I'm solutions. I'm not problems, Georgia. That's not.
If they press the keyboard with the space bar with their thumb, maybe that could be a click.
Maybe there's a button.
And click.
Maybe there's a small.
A button right below the space bar for clicking.
Or maybe if you tap the key, but no, that wouldn't work either because you'd be tapping things all the time.
Maybe if once you activate it, you slide your but I do that a lot though. I actually I'm very
brush your
tactile,
fingers.
and so I'm often brushing my fingers around the keyboard just to find the I type. So the F and the H key, the F and the J key have the little divots so that I know that I've placed my fingers on the right. So I'm always doing that. So that's the only thing is I'd be activating the mouse and annoying myself. And
others.
Yeah. I like the idea of it, Renee, because it does seem very sort of unique and certainly doesn't you don't have to extend the keyboard or shorten the keys themselves in order to fit the trackpad.
I have
But
a
in
crazy
execution,
idea.
it doesn't seem like it would work.
What if the space bar was bigger and then that was your trackpad? And if you press it down, then it clicks it, but it's also your space key when you're typing.
So you're actually activating the trackpad. So like the space bar, normally it's always space bar, but you do an action like pressing and holding, and that
Just
turns the space bar
wiggling it
into
around.
a trackpad.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it doesn't take up more space because that's in the end, like, again, if it was just on the end where the bezel is to the keyboard, like you make it a little bit wider and you could use that entire thing, that probably would work as well. I don't think that people would be too annoyed by that. You know, people get annoyed by almost anything, but I don't think that would be too annoying if you had just the bezel part that was the trackpad as well on the end.
Yeah.
So it might be, you know, you might have to move it up.
It might work. I think I'm just picturing like a cloth covered trackpad. That's what I was saying, a taffeta covered trackpad, and how weird that would be. If
It
they
might
did
feel a
something like
little
that.
weird, but I could get used to that. I'm used to smooth, where you don't feel where, like, you know, it's very
Smooth,
like,
smooth,
you know,
yeah.
you're ice skating upon your trackpad. I don't know about having to work harder, and I know this shows the utmost of laziness upon my part, but I don't know how it would feel with having to work harder than gliding my finger across it like it was ice skating. I'm not that person that would be into you know, snowshoeing it with my trackpad.
Right. Your fingers would just have to work too hard. They'd have to get a bunch of exercise in to make it work.
You know, or I would worry that I would get, like, if I'm playing a game or something, I would end up getting rug burn upon my finger, which I used to get when I played a lot of slider games. I would actually get, like, I would be missing my fingerprints on that part of my finger.
They would just rub into a shiny little sheen on the tips of your fingers.
Yeah, I was kind of getting ready for my life.
Yep, there you go. Just playing some video games on your cloth trackpad to get that going. One more thing that's kind of on the rumor list, although this one is a little bit less rumor and a little bit more found in the beta, so it might actually happen, was that it was discovered that some wording or some coding about the potential of having OS recovery for iPhone and iPad and other devices that normally you would have to connect to your computer in order to activate recovery mode or DFU mode. So the idea of this would be, from some of the speculation that has come from that, is that OS recovery for your iPhone and your iPad is that you would no longer have to connect it to your Mac or PC in order to hit recovery mode, but instead it'd be an over-the-air way to trigger that. I think I have two feelings about that. Feeling number one, for anybody who doesn't have a computer lying around, the fact that that's the only way that you can go into recovery mode right now on your iPhone or iPad is very frustrating. My mom doesn't own a computer, but she does own an iPhone and an iPad. And there was one time when she was having some real trouble, and I told her, well, connect it to a computer and go into recovery mode. And she said, I don't have a computer. She had to go into an Apple store and have it done, which actually is probably better for her because she had some help getting it fixed. But there are a lot of people that have to do that. They can't connect their iPhone or iPad to their computer. So this is great. But then on the other hand, I think about, you know, how over the air stuff can take so long and be so just dragging things down, and even potentially just not working because it took too long to try to establish that. What if your Wi-Fi is low? What, you know, like how do you deal with that? So, Renee, first of all, do you think that this is coming? So I think it was the beta for 13.4. I'm probably going to have that wrong. Let me double check. So it's iOS 13.4 beta, which is the next, our next point iteration coming up. So the idea would be that it's coming before June, if anything. Do you think that it's coming, or do you think that this is maybe just like a future thought?
So I've said this a few times, but I'm going to keep repeating it, is that there was a rumor a couple of years ago that Google was going to make a Pixel with no ports, and that you would have to do online recovery if anything went wrong. And the reason they didn't ship it is that online recovery is really, really hard. And Apple famously, the Apple Watch, you can't just connect that to iTunes and recover it. But the solution for that is go to the Apple Store. And they took the port out of the previous Apple TV had a USB-C port that you could connect to iTunes and recover, and they took that away. And so now you have to go to an Apple store and recover that. And it's one thing if you're like, oh man, my Apple TV or my Apple Watch is at the Apple store, and it's so inconvenient. But if it's your phone, it's like, no, that's a deal breaker. So I think, part of it could be preparing us for the portless future, but there's a whole heap of convenience. If Apple could nail it, if Apple could make it really solid, then you wouldn't have, like, some people don't even remember plugging their phone into iTunes anymore, or now it's the Finder, or don't have the cable, or all these things. It just makes our life so much easier.
Yeah. So I know I kind of was wondering whether or not you would kind of go the route of maybe Apple is planning for the portless phone idea. I would like to hope that that is definitely not going to happen. Specifically for some of the things that you're talking about. It's one thing, like you said, for it to be your Apple Watch or your Apple TV, you can live without it for a couple of days. Most people could not live without their phones for even a full day. So it would be like really a negative impact on a lot of people to do something like that. But what about this idea of OS recovery? So it's sort of like what you're saying, this online recovery. Do you think that Apple may have found a solution, or do you think that maybe they're just kind of putting the bookmark in there to maybe check it out at a future time and see if it works?
Yeah, I mean, there's these two schools of thought, and Apple has ascribed to both of them in the past. One is you burn the boats behind you, so you have no choice but to make it work. That's what they did. They said with Face ID, right? It's like if we'd left Touch ID, there'd be no impetus to have to make Face ID work. So they took Touch ID off. Now, sort of what Google was apparently going through with that for the Pixel 2, I think, or Pixel 3 prototype was, if we get rid of the port, we have no choice but to make it work. And oops, we couldn't make it work, so I got to put the port back. I think it's safer to do it in advance and see if it's rock solid, because if you ship a phone with no port and this doesn't work, you're done. Like the minute anything bricks, like a bad update, you're just done. So I'd like to see them not burn the boats behind this one. I just like to see them, and then like nerds like us can experiment with it. And if it works really well for a year, it's sort of like they were so smart with some of the other stuff they did with some of the bug fixes where they'd roll them out, test them, roll them back, and you don't even know what was happening. But they got all the data for it, and they could see what the problems were before they did that with APFS, and they did that with some of the performance fixes. And then you get all the data, you see how it works, and then you roll out the final version. I think that's the safe play here.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're right. I think rolling out something like OS recovery so that it doesn't mean a portless phone. It just means here's an option. And then people like you and I, of course, we're going to dig in and we're going to figure it out and try it and, find out how bad it is, find out what the glitches are. And then, Apple can use that information and that data to determine whether or not this is viable for them to actually make a phone without a port in the future, which I still don't think is a good idea. Even if OS recovery works great, I hope that we don't get to that point. But I guess if OS recovery, if the ability to go into recovery mode on your iPhone or iPad without having to connect to your computer works really well all of the time, every time, then I'd be okay with a portless phone. Because to me, that's the biggest hurdle, is that we need to be able to plug our phones into our computer if we have a problem that we need to fix. And frankly, once a year that happens to me, because there's something that goes wrong with the beta and I have to gotta go into recovery mode and start this all over again.
Vendors like it because they associate anything with hardware as a potential failure point. Like when they made the home button virtual, because there are a whole bunch of people whose home button stopped working. And this is like, oh, someone poured chocolate syrup in their lightning port, or they went, and like the phones are waterproof, but they're water resistant. But if you go swimming or it drops in water, then you immediately plug it into charge, it can still short out because the electricity in the water is a bad thing. So or people, they get dodgy cables and plug it in and it starts a fire. There's just all these things that removing it would prevent. It would be a pain in the butt, probably worse than the headphone jack, but it has some advantages, and companies just have to keep weighing the pain to advantages and see how it works out. Yeah.
Well, so maybe we'll see it very soon. Maybe we'll see it sometime this year, but it might just be testing the waters and see how it works kind of thing. So.
Yeah.
Well, we have come down to the end of our hour. It's been a lot of fun. We had some good conversations this time. If Georgia excuse me, if
Yeah, what did we
Georgia
say to her? She just ran out on us. Did we offend
yeah,
her
we
Shaolin
we
temple?
lost her. She had to go.
Okay.
We overextended her stay with us, and Georgia had to ditch out. So she waved goodbye as she left the room, and she would want you to know that you can find her videos at anxiety-video.com if you're having anxiety with personal space or confronting issues that you have in the workplace or in your home life. You can check all of her videos out and her company's videos out at anxiety-videos.com. She's also on Twitter sometimes at Georgia_Dow. And Renee, if people want to hit you up on the internet, on the social medias, and talk to you about their feelings about whether or not the science is real, where can they find you?
The feeds. You can find me at Renee Ritchie on almost all the social things. And you can find me at iMore.com/vector for the words and YouTube.com/vector for the moving pictures.
Yeah, and definitely check out Vector videos at youtube.com/vector for really in-depth, insightful, well-researched videos. They're absolutely amazing. They make my day all the time. I really enjoy them. I definitely am a smarter person about Apple because of your videos. So thank you, Renee. And if you want to get in touch with me on the social medias, you can find me at Appleholik on Twitter. That's APPAHOLIK. And you can find me at Lori Gill at most of the other social things. And thanks to everybody that's been sitting in and listening. There's been lively conversation going on, so much that I haven't even been able to catch up. So thanks to everyone who joined us on the live feed and had all kinds of things to say. We do normally record at 1 p.m. Eastern time on Fridays. This week we actually had to postpone for an hour, so it was 2 p.m. Eastern time. But it pops up on if you follow us on if you subscribe to us on YouTube, it'll pop up that our live feed is starting, or we tweet it out every week as well, so you'll know ahead of time within the next few minutes when we're going to be live doing the live stream. But it's always on Fridays. It is usually at 1 p.m. Eastern time. So please join us. It's a lot of fun to have you in the room with us. And thanks to Jim Metzendorf, who once again is making us sound like absolute angels every day. We thank you for everything you do for us. You make our worlds so much better. And thanks to everybody who's listening right now, who wasn't here at during the live stream. We love to listen. We love to know that you're there listening to us. And if you have any feedback for us, we love to talk to you on Twitter too. So thanks very much for everything, and have a great rest of your day. Goodbye.